In the sterile, glass-walled canyons of the financial district, Serafina Sterling's world was a symphony of quiet hums and muted clicks. The air in her penthouse office atop the Sterling Dynamics Tower was filtered, chilled, and carried the faint metallic scent of ambition. Her hands, always perfectly manicured, moved with decisive grace across holographic interfaces, commanding a global aerospace empire built on ruthless efficiency. She saw people as assets, emotions as liabilities, and life as a series of strategic acquisitions. Her loneliness was a fortress, its walls paneled in Italian marble and reinforced with profit margins. Miles away, in a world of sun-warmed concrete and the honest smell of motor oil, Elias Vance's hands were a roadmap of his life. Calloused and traced with fine lines of grease that no soap could fully erase, they were the hands of a man who built, repaired, and understood the physical world. His kingdom was a small, tidy auto garage, its air thick with the scent of gasoline and hard work. His greatest treasure was not a stock portfolio, but his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, whose crayon drawings of winged horses and rocket ships were taped to the side of a formidable-looking toolbox. Elias was a man defined by what he had lost, a brilliant career, a beloved wife, and what he had sworn to protect, a quiet life and the bright, innocent world of his child. The two worlds were destined to collide at the grand unveiling of the Sterling Valkyrie, Serafina's billion-dollar moonshot, a hypercar with an experimental aerospace-grade engine, designed to be her company's triumphant entry into the consumer market. A massive crowd of journalists and investors gathered in a sleek, hangar-like showroom. At the center of it all, under 1,000 spotlights, the Valkyrie gleamed like a shard of obsidian. Serafina stood at the podium, a vision of corporate power in a tailored suit, her voice crisp and confident. "Today, we don't just launch a car," she declared, her words echoing through the cavernous space. "We launch the future." But when the moment came, and the designated driver pressed the ignition, the future sputtered. The engine whined, a high-pitched, agonizing sound, before letting out a percussive bang and falling silent, a plume of delicate white smoke ghosting from its vents. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Serafina's face, projected onto massive screens, became a mask of ice. Her engineers swarmed the car, their faces pale with panic. After 10 minutes of frantic, whispered consultations, her lead engineer approached her, his expression grim. "The cascade failure is total. It's unfixable, Ms. Sterling. Not here, not now." Humiliation, cold and sharp, pierced Serafina's composure. Her eyes scanned the room, desperate for a solution, a scapegoat, anything. They landed on the event's contracted on-site mechanic, standing quietly by the service entrance, his expression one of calm. Diagnosis. It was Elias. In a moment of pure, desperate arrogance, she pointed a rigid finger at him. "You," she commanded, her voice amplified by the microphone. "The mechanic. You fix it." A murmur went through the crowd. It was an impossible, absurd demand. But Elias Vance simply wiped his hands on a clean rag, his gaze steady, and walked toward the silent, billion-dollar monument to failure. The world would soon learn that some of the greatest minds don't reside in skyscrapers. Elias moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to calm the frantic energy around the car. He didn't look at the panicked engineers or the sea of cameras. His focus was entirely on the machine. He circled the Valkyrie once, his eyes tracing lines the designers had intended, his ears seeming to listen for the echo of its failure. He didn't need the frantic readouts on the engineers' tablets. He placed a hand on the engine's cowling, feeling the residual heat, his touch as gentle as a doctor's palpation. "Can I have a Phillips head and a flat blade, please?" he asked, his voice low but clear. One of the Sterling engineers, flustered, thrust a complex-looking digital torque wrench at him. Elias politely declined. "Just the basics, thank you." He took the simple screwdrivers and, with practiced ease, removed an access panel. He peered inside for a long moment, the only sound the frantic clicking of camera shutters. He hummed softly to himself, a tune Lily favored. Then he reached in, his fingers deftly navigating the labyrinth of wires and conduits. He disconnected a small, unassuming sensor, barely the size of a thumbnail. He held it up to the light, turning it over. "There," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Resonance fracture in the piezoelectric transducer. It's feeding the fuel injector garbage data, causing a desynchronization in the plasma ignition cycle. The lead engineer stared, dumbfounded. That's impossible. We ran 1,000 simulations. Elias ignored him, turning to Serafina. Do you have a bypass chip? A standard Series 7 diagnostic shunt should do it. Serafina, completely out of her depth, simply nodded at her team, who scrambled to produce the requested item. Elias fitted the small chip into the port, reconnected the panel, and wiped his hands again. Try it now, he said quietly. The driver, looking utterly bewildered, got back into the car. He pressed the ignition. The Valkyrie's engine roared to life, a deep, perfect, thunderous purr that vibrated through the floor and into the bones of every person in the room. The crowd erupted into applause. Serafina Sterling stood frozen, staring not at her triumphant machine, but at the quiet mechanic who had just salvaged her future with a screwdriver and a few words of incomprehensible genius. Back in her office, the adrenaline of the save had been replaced by a chilling, obsessive curiosity. The Valkyrie's engine was a proprietary masterpiece, a fusion of technologies that had never been combined. No ordinary mechanic could have diagnosed it, let alone in under 5 minutes. Find him, she commanded her head of security, a man accustomed to requests for corporate espionage, not background checks on garage owners. I want to know everything about Elias Vance, every school, every job, every traffic ticket. While she waited, she replayed the moment in her mind, his calm, the absolute certainty in his hands, the way he spoke of plasma ignition cycles as if discussing the weather. It was the language of a creator, not a repairman. The report arrived on her private server less than an hour later, a slender encrypted file that she opened with a tap of her finger. The first page was mundane. Owner of Vance Auto, widower, sole guardian of Lily Vance, age 7, clean record. Then she clicked to the second page, and the world tilted on its axis. Elias Vance. Graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, double doctorate in aeronautical engineering and applied physics. Valedictorian, author of a groundbreaking thesis on quantum resonance propulsion that was still required reading in the field. Lead designer of the X-77 hypersonic prototype for the Department of Defense. A name that had been whispered with reverence in the highest echelons of aerospace engineering a decade ago. A prodigy expected to redefine the industry. And then, nothing. 10 years ago, he had vanished. The file contained a final, redacted addendum. A flight test incident. A catastrophic failure. One casualty listed, Dr. Elena Vance, his wife. Serafina sank back into her chair, the cold glass of her office no longer feeling like a symbol of power, but of isolation. She hadn't just humiliated a mechanic. She had publicly challenged a fallen giant, a man who had walked away from a world she had fought her entire life to conquer. The mystery of his failure was eclipsed only by the mystery of his disappearance. The next afternoon, a sleek black sedan, a car that cost more than Elias's entire garage, pulled up to the curb. Serafina Sterling stepped out, her sharp suit and severe posture a stark contrast to the welcoming clutter of the garage. Elias was under a vintage muscle car, only his legs visible. "Mr. Vance," she called out, her voice unnaturally loud in the quiet space. He slid out on a creeper, wiping his hands on a rag. He wasn't surprised to see her. "Ms. Sterling." "I came to offer you a job," she said, getting straight to the point. "Head of my R&D division. Name your price." Elias shook his head before she even finished. "I'm not for sale. I have a job." "Fixing oil pans? A man with your background?" She scoffed, a hint of her old arrogance returning. "My background is my business. This," he said, gesturing around the garage, "is my life. I'm happy here." Just then, Lily skipped out from the small office, holding a drawing. She stopped when she saw Serafina, her eyes wide. "Daddy, who's the fancy lady?" Before Elias could answer, he'd walked right up to Serafina. "Why do you look so sad?" she asked, her voice filled with the guileless curiosity of a child. The question struck Serafina with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever asked her that. Sadness was a weakness, a data point to be excised. She knelt, fumbling for a response. I'm not sad." "Yes, you are," Lily insisted, pointing to the drawing in her hand. It was a picture of a woman with a crown, standing alone in a big empty castle. You look like her. At that moment, Serafina's phone buzzed with an urgent notification. She glanced at it, and the color drained from her face. A secure server at Sterling Dynamics had been breached. The core guidance software for their next satellite launch had been corrupted. It wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. The Valkyrie hadn't just failed, it had been targeted. She looked from the terrifying message on her phone to the brilliant engineer in front of her, and then to the wise child holding the drawing. For the first time, Serafina Sterling knew she needed help, not from an employee, but from an equal. It wasn't an engine flaw, Serafina said, her voice stripped of its usual command. She showed Elias the encrypted alert on her phone. The Valkyrie, the satellite guidance system, someone is systematically attacking my company from the inside. She looked at him, her vulnerability a raw, unfamiliar thing. I don't need an employee, Mr. Vance. I need a partner. I need the man who wrote the book on quantum resonance, not the man who fixes cars. Elias studied the data she presented. He saw the elegant, malicious code woven into the satellite software, a digital signature of destruction. It was clever, almost untraceable, and it felt familiar. He recognized the ghost of the same logic that had been used to create the resonance fracture in the Valkyrie's transducer. It wasn't just sabotage. It was the work of a brilliant, vindictive mind. I'll help, he said, his decision made. But on my terms, I work from here, and at 3 o'clock every day, I stop to pick up my daughter from school. No exceptions. Serafina agreed without hesitation. For the next week, the garage transformed into an unlikely war room. Schematics for satellite systems were spread across workbenches next to carburetors. Elias, fueled by coffee and a renewed sense of purpose, dove into the code. Serafina, humbled and operating far outside her comfort zone, became his logistical commander, procuring secure servers and tracking personnel movements. They worked side by side, a strange and effective team. His quiet, focused genius was the perfect foil for her strategic, big-picture thinking. He found the saboteurs' digital fingerprints, but they were hidden behind layers of proxies and firewalls within Sterling Dynamics' own network. They were chasing a ghost. He's using a quantum encryption key, Elias murmured late one night, staring at a screen of cascading symbols. It's almost perfect. The data trail self-destructs milliseconds after it's accessed. They had hit a wall. The saboteur was always one step ahead, seemingly aware of their every move. A deep sense of dread began to settle over Serafina. This wasn't just about her company anymore. The person doing this knew her systems, and wanted to watch her burn. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While Elias wrestled with the unbreakable encryption, Lily sat nearby, coloring. She was drawing a maze, and she explained to a weary Serafina how she always solved them. You don't start at the beginning, she said, pointing a crayon. You start at the end and go backwards. The simple childish logic sparked an idea in Elias's mind. They weren't trying to follow the saboteur. They needed to predict his final move and trace it back. He's not just corrupting systems. He's positioning the company for a catastrophic failure, Elias reasoned. A failure so public, so devastating, that the stock price will collapse to nothing. Serafina's blood ran cold. The Elysium Project, she whispered. It was their flagship project. A new network of commercial satellites set to launch in 2 weeks. A public failure there would be the end. Working backwards from that inevitable disaster, Elias designed a digital trap. Instead of trying to break the encryption, he created a honeypot, a fake vulnerability in the Elysium launch code that was too tempting for the saboteur to ignore. When he takes the bait, the system won't just block him, Elias explained, a grim light in his eyes. It will capture his terminal's unique quantum signature and trace the signal back to its physical origin. Instantly, they baited the trap and waited. For 48 agonizing hours, there was nothing. Then, in the dead of night, an alert flashed across their screen. The trap was sprung. The trace program Elias had written exploded into action, bypassing proxies and tearing through firewalls. A location resolved on their map, the penthouse office of a rival corporation, Thorn Industries. And with the location came a name, pulled from the terminal's registration data, Marcus Thorn. Serafina stared at the screen, a wave of nausea washing over her. Marcus Thorne, her biggest corporate rival, her former fiancé. The man she had left a year ago when she realized his ambition was a poison that corrupted everything it touched. He wasn't just trying to destroy her company. This was personal. He was trying to destroy her. The full scope of Marcus's plan was devastatingly clear. He had used his intimate knowledge of her company, gained during their relationship, to plant the seeds of its destruction. The Valkyrie was just the overture. His endgame was to trigger a launch failure for the Elysium project, short the stock into oblivion, and then initiate a hostile takeover, buying the ruins of Sterling Dynamics for a fraction of its worth. He would not only crush his rival, but possess her. Legacy. The ultimate act of vengeance. They had the digital proof, but it was complex, and Marcus was a master of plausible deniability. A public accusation could get bogged down in court for years while her company bled out. "We can't fight him in the boardroom or the courtroom," Serafina said, her voice hard as steel. "We have to beat him in the theater. We need to expose him so completely, so publicly, that there is nowhere left for him to hide." The annual shareholder meeting was in 3 days. It was the perfect stage. Elias devised the final piece of the plan. It was risky, relying on Marcus's arrogance and Serafina's ability to act. "You have to look completely defeated," Elias instructed. "You're going to go on that stage and announce that due to unforeseen technical setbacks, the Elysium launch is being indefinitely postponed. You're going to let him think he's won." While she played her part, Elias would be backstage, ready to execute a program he called The Reckoning. Once Marcus was lured into a position of gloating, feeling untouchable, Elias would activate the program. It wouldn't just show the data. It would create a live, unassailable timeline of the entire conspiracy, projecting it onto the massive screen behind the stage for every shareholder and journalist to see. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. If it failed, Serafina would lose everything. She looked at Elias, at the quiet confidence in his eyes, and for the first time in her life, she placed her trust completely in another person. The atmosphere at the shareholder meeting was electric with tension. Rumors of Sterling Dynamics' troubles had been circulating for days, and the room was packed. Serafina walked onto the stage, her posture slumped, her face a mask of weary resignation. She looked every bit the defeated CEO. She approached the podium and began her speech, her voice heavy with feigned regret. "It is with a heavy heart," she began, "that I must announce a delay in the Elysium project launch." A wave of murmurs and frantic typing swept through the audience. As she spoke, she saw him, Marcus Thorne, sitting in the front row, a predatory smile playing on his lips. He was savoring her humiliation. As she finished, he stood up, feigning concern. "A question for the CEO," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He was given a microphone. "Given these catastrophic setbacks, is it not time for a change in leadership? Perhaps a leader with a more robust vision for the future?" It was his moment of triumph. He walked onto the stage, positioning himself beside her, as if to signal a transfer of power. "Sterling Dynamics needs a firm hand," he declared, turning to the audience. "It needs a vision that isn't plagued by constant, embarrassing failures." Backstage, Elias watched on a monitor, his finger hovering over the enter key. "Now, Serafina," he whispered. On stage, Serafina looked Marcus directly in the eye. "You're right, Marcus. It is time for a robust vision. One of truth." It was the signal. Elias hit the key. The massive screen behind Marcus, which had been displaying the Sterling Dynamics logo, flickered and changed. It now showed a timeline. It began with emails from Marcus to a shell corporation, then financial transfers to a disgruntled Sterling engineer, then the malicious code itself, with a direct trace leading back to the terminal in Marcus Thorne's office. Every piece of the conspiracy laid bare in stark, undeniable graphics. Marcus turned, his face contorting from triumph to horror as he saw his own digital treachery displayed for the world. He was frozen, exposed in a spotlight of his own making. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into a cacophony of gasps, angry shouts, and the relentless flash of cameras. His ruin was absolute and instantaneous. In the aftermath, the story of the quiet mechanic who saved the aerospace giant became legend. Elias Vance was no longer a ghost. He was a hero. Sterling Dynamics stock rebounded with unprecedented force, and Serafina was lauded for her resilience and courage. But she knew the victory wasn't hers alone. In a press conference days later, she stood before the world and set the record straight. "The person who saved this company is not me," she announced, her voice clear and strong. "It is this man." She turned and gestured to Elias, who stood uncomfortably at the side of the stage. She publicly offered him the position of Chief Innovation Officer, a role that came with an astronomical salary and immense power. Later, in the quiet of his garage, he gave her his answer. "I'll take the job," he said, "but my title is Chief Problem Solver, and my office stays right here." He laid out his terms. He would lead her R&D teams, but he would do it from his own space, a place of authenticity and creation. He would have final say on the ethics of any project, and every single day, at 3 o'clock, the chief problem solver of Sterling Dynamics would leave to go pick up his daughter from school. Serafina smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached her eyes. "I wouldn't have it any other way," she said. She was no longer just a CEO, she was a leader who understood that the greatest assets aren't found on a balance sheet. The garage, once a sanctuary from the world, became a bridge between two of them. Blueprints for next-generation engines were unrolled next to Lily's finger paintings. The scent of motor oil now mingled with the faint, expensive perfume Serafina wore. The future of Sterling Dynamics was being forged not in a sterile boardroom, but in a place of honest work, guided by a man of integrity and a woman who had rediscovered her own. One evening, the three of them were huddled over a new design, a revolutionary engine that was both powerful and clean. Lily pointed to a complex array of conduits. "It looks like a family," she said, tracing the lines with her small finger. "All the little pipes are holding hands with the big ones." Elias and Serafina looked at each other over the plans, a shared, unspoken understanding passing between them. They weren't just building an engine, they were building a new life, a new kind of family, held together by trust and mutual respect. The broken pieces of their pasts were being reassembled into something stronger and more beautiful than before. Have you ever wondered what true wealth really is? Is it found in the towering skyscrapers of finance, or in the quiet integrity of a loving heart? This story reminds us that the greatest value lies not in what we own, but in what we build, what we protect, and who we become. Integrity is a currency that never loses its worth.